Ashes of Creation is an upcoming MMO being made by Intrepid Studios. Intrepid's creative director Steven has been very ambitious in many aspects of the game's development, including classes, or more specifically archetypes that make up classes. I do want to remind you that we are yet to have Alpha 2 release, and so this is all a work in progress and is subject to change based off of feedback and testing. With that being said, let's take a deeper look into Ashes of Creation's archetypes and figure out which one is best for you. To start off, you got to know that Ashes of Creation will have primary and secondary archetypes. The primary archetype is essentially what you will pick when you first start your character. You will be able to pick 8 different primary archetypes: the Bard, Cleric, Fighter, Mage, Ranger, Rogue, Summoner, and Tank. The primary archetype is not changeable, and then the secondary archetype will come later as you reach level 25. Once you're level 25 and you pick that secondary archetype, the combination of your primary and your secondary is really your class. By looking at this chart, you really start to understand the amount of options that you have, 64 combinations in all. Jeffrey Bard from Intrepid explained it this way: they're not really talking about 64 true classes, they're talking more about 8 classes with 64 variants. There isn't as much variance between the 64 classes as you might expect. It's not like that you are having 64 different versions of radically different classes. With that being said, Intrepid also gave an example on how a secondary archetype would affect the primary. If a fighter were to choose a mage as a secondary archetype, the fighter would become a spell sword. This combination opens up augments that can be applied to the skills in their primary skill tree. Fighters have a rush skill that allows them to rush towards a target, and upon reaching that target, deal an amount of damage with the chance to knock the target down. A blink augment would be applied to the rush skill, which would now teleport the player to the target, thus eliminating the charge time on that skill. So as a recap, you pick your first archetype when you start your character. Then at level 25, you pick from the same 8 archetypes again, thus defining your overall class from the table I am showing here, which leads into augments. From the previous example with the fighter and the mage combination, the spell sword class, augmenting affected the rush skill. Rush normally has the character charge at the target, but now, with the blink augment on the primary ability, it changed the nature of the ability. You're able to have one active augment on a primary ability at a time. Steven has previously mentioned that augments can affect a multitude of things. It can drastically change the ability itself. It can change the damage type, the cooldown period, the damage values, and the distance, such as range effect to a melee effect. They are creating entirely new spells, but they're going to keep obviously some identity with what that primary active ability was. When it comes down to roles for Ashes of Creation, it will follow the holy trinity of tank, DPS, and support, being heals and non-healer. To quote Steven again, he says, "We have our 8 base archetypes, and the trinity is a pretty strong influence with regards to 8 base classes. However, the area in which we actually begin to play with that line between the trinity is in the secondary classes that you can pick. That's where we begin to blend those spaces and allow people a little bit of an influence over their role, and whether or not they fit perfectly within a particular category within the trinity." So ultimately, what archetype is for you? Well, with 64 class combinations, Ashes of Creation gives you one of the most diverse selections I have seen in MMOs to date. Because of that, you will really want to think about your playstyle carefully so that you can pick your secondary archetype in a manner that best suits you. Class role identity is definitely a thing to consider as well. You will need to take into account how the secondary archetype will augment a primary ability and how you will use that. All things considered, this is definitely a complex class system, but I hope that this video has helped shed some light on how customizable your class experience is and give you some sort of idea what route you might want to take. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit that like button for the algorithm and subscribe if you want more MMO content in the future, and I'll see you guys in the next video.